This week, a hard look at the impact of Mississippi's Jim Crow-era voting ban for felons. Tens of thousands are barred from the polls. And the Marshall Project talked with some of them. Journalist Caleb Bedillion walks us through his investigation. Also, Governor Reeves touts a new report on the state's tourism industry. And State Senator John Horhn tosses his hat into the ring of Jackson's next mayoral contest. Those stories are straight ahead this Sunday on Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thanks for joining us for this October 6th edition of Insight. 12 News followed along last session as some state lawmakers tried and failed to reform Mississippi's felony voting law. Now, a nonprofit news group focused on criminal justice has uncovered the true scale of that law's impact on the state electorate. The Marshall Project titled its report, "A Life Sentence: How Mississippi's Forever Voting Ban Keeps Thousands from the Polls." And the reporter behind the story is investigative journalist Caleb Bedillion, formerly of the Daily Journal, now writing for the Marshall Project. Caleb, talk to us a little bit. What prompted the Marshall Project to investigate the impact of Mississippi's disenfranchisement law?
Well, of course, we obviously have a national election this November. So a lot of people are thinking about that, about the presidential election, and about voting. Lots of people thinking about voting. I'm thinking about who they're going to vote for, but there are lots of Mississippians that can't vote because of our disenfranchisement laws that affect some people with felony convictions. Mississippi is one of only a handful of states that disenfranchise some people for life because of a felony conviction. Most U.S. states do not do that. So we wanted to take a closer look at the impact and who's affected by that law.
Talk about some of those of voters that are impacted by this felony law.
Right. So my story that's come out focused on a couple of different people, including a man named John Cook. He lives down near Hattiesburg in that part of the state. Originally from here, got in some trouble when he was a young man. Got caught up in drugs and some other crimes associated with that. In the late 70s, was convicted, served a little time in state prison, and then got his life together. He's owned several telecom-based businesses. I think by all accounts, most people would agree, he repaid his debt to society and became a contributing member of society, but he can't vote in Mississippi. He lived in Georgia for a little bit. After Hurricane Katrina, he left his home down on the Gulf Coast, moved to Georgia. Georgia, after you do your time, after you finish with your sentence, you can vote again. That's the way most U.S. states are. After you've served your time, some states you got to finish probation, but once all that's completely behind you, you can vote again. Comes back home, he sells his business, retires, comes back to Mississippi, 40-year-old conviction, he can't cast a ballot in this election coming up. And he's upset by that. Feels like, you know, his home state doesn't welcome him back, doesn't feel like he's a full member of society because of a mistake he made 40 years ago.
Talk about why critics find this law particularly confusing.
Right, so in Mississippi, yes, so he has several convictions, some of which would not impact his right to vote. So Mr. Cook, he had a couple of drug possession convictions. If he only had those charges, he'd still be able to vote. In fact, someone today, if you're convicted of only a drug charge, no other charges, you can vote from state prison. You can be sitting in state prison, cast an absentee ballot, and have that vote counted. So some people with a felony conviction can vote from prison. Others, if you have a grand larceny conviction, bribery, fraud, there's a range of crimes that will impact you. You can't vote ever again unless you have your right to vote restored by the legislature. So it's a two-tiered system. And for some people, Mississippi has one of the most permissive voting laws. You can cast a ballot while you're in prison. For other people, we have one of the most restrictive voting laws for people with felony convictions.
How many people are we looking at? Because I know we go back to about 1994.
Right, so it's hard to calculate this. So there's a list of all felony cases and how they concluded from 1994 to the present. And so our best estimate is at least 55,000 people that are on that list have lost their right to vote and can't vote today. But we know there's more people. Mr. Cook, for example, is not on that list because his conviction is from even earlier, even before 1994. So we know at least 55,000 people are affected, but there are more because the records just aren't complete.
Do you think the state's doing a decent job at monitoring those who are disenfranchised, or can they do a better job?
That's in the control of local voting officials. So we have a voting system that's managed by local voting officials. So when you go to register in your home county, the circuit clerk is supposed to, take your information on your application, put it in the state system. The state has a system that it's supposed to flag if there's a potential issue. Maybe you do have a conviction that's disenfranchising, but then the local officials have to investigate that further. So we have 82 counties, 82 circuit clerks. That's a lot of different officials that have to administer these laws, and we just know there's a lot of misinformation. Some people believe, for example, all felony convictions take away your right to vote, and that's not true. Most people with felony convictions actually can vote in Mississippi, but there's a lot of confusion about that.
And how did you guys go about getting the numbers of those who are disenfranchised, and how long did that process take?
Right, so there's a state office, the Administrative Office of Courts, that they collect all these records from 1994 to the present is what they have available of felony cases that have reached a conclusion. So you have to look at all those cases, compare it to the list of crimes that will take away your right to vote. And then you have to make sure you're not counting people twice, because there are people that have 3, 4, 5 felony convictions, and maybe some are disenfranchising, some aren't. So you've got to make sure you're, only counting individuals. So it took a bit of time.
What are the racial disparities that you're finding through your investigation, and what impact does it have on communities?
Right, so black voters are about 40% of the statewide total of voting age adults in Mississippi, 40%, but about 60% of those who are disenfranchised because of a felony conviction are black. So we know black Mississippians are affected by the disenfranchisement laws disproportionate to their share of the voting age population. And the disenfranchisement law has its roots in the 1890 state constitution, and the intent was to take away voting rights from black people.
You're right about the past efforts to change that law. Why do you think it didn't pass in the legislature?
So this legislative session, in the early part of this year, the House of Representatives passed a bill with overwhelming bipartisan support that would have restored voting rights to people like John Cook, people who had nonviolent felony convictions that were either 5 years in the past or more. So again, large support, Republican and Democrat in the House. It went to the Senate. The support just wasn't there. Not a lot of comment from those in the Senate who didn't support the bill about why not. There hadn't been a lot of strong support. Even some people in the Senate have said, well, maybe the list ought to be changed, but they don't seem that interested, frankly, in revising the law in the same way that the House did. But the House, the key lawmakers said they're going to try again. So this may be an issue next year.
Without the legislature, is there a way to help those who are disenfranchised in Mississippi? Is there another path? Right.
So if you had your voting rights taken away because of a felony conviction, you can have, there are organizations like Mississippi Votes that will take your information and work with you to get a lawmaker, either a state senator or a state representative, to file a bill to restore your voting rights. So this last session, there were about 50 such bills, 50 people who had a bill introduced to give their voting rights back. Only 16 were passed and signed by the governor, or approved by, allowed to become law. The governor didn't sign them all.
What did the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals say about the disenfranchisement here in Mississippi?
Right, so there have been 2 lawsuits recently on this issue. One said the law is racially discriminatory and should be struck down because of that. That was upheld. That lawsuit, they said, the Fifth Circuit said that we don't agree with that argument a couple years ago. This past summer, the full Fifth Circuit rejected an argument that Mississippi's law violates the U.S. Constitution's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. So that was another loss in the federal courts for opponents of this law.
What do you see as the next steps for advocates voting for reform for the voting rights here in Mississippi?
It's pretty clear at this point, there's very little chance of the federal courts changing this. So the legislature is really where all the action is, and the House is there, so it's about the Senate. Can supporters of reform find support in the state Senate.
Do you see that happening? Do you see the appetite in the Senate to change the voting rights?
I mean, it didn't even get a hearing in committee this last session, but like most things, it's about leadership. Does Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann want this to get a hearing and be considered or not? He says the votes aren't there. The senators like considering these bills individually. So opponents of our disenfranchisement law have a little work to do for sure.
So we'll stay tuned.
We'll stay tuned, yes.
All right, Caleb, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
All right, and we'll be right back.
Well, if you look at what has happened under Mike Johnson's speakership, very little. He even voted against keeping government open. If we were under his real leadership and he had the votes, our government would be shut down as I speak. So it's about leadership. When I look at what's happened in support of our historically black colleges, when I look in terms of health care, when I look in terms of education, all those things happen when Democrats are in charge. The businesses that are coming to Mississippi are coming because of the incentives created by Democrats. So I look forward to November 5th. We have a message. I'm excited about it. I'm excited about the fact that Kamala Harris has an opportunity to become the first female president of the United States. It's a woman's time. They've helped men all along. Now it's time for women to step forward. I want to be a part of it. And so for those who are undecided, just look at the record, and I think it will speak very clearly as to who the best candidate is.
That's Benny Thompson, Mississippi's 2nd District Congressman. He was visiting Alcorn State University Friday as that school inaugurated Dr. Tracy M. Cook as its 21st president. $17.5 billion, that's no small change for an economy like Mississippi's. But Governor Tate Reeves says that's the total economic impact from tourism in Mississippi last year. He revealed those numbers Friday in Hattiesburg at the Governor's Conference on Tourism. Here's the governor himself unveiling Visit Mississippi's annual report on tourism economic contribution.
But in 2023, and if you're in the media, you may want to start taking some notes here. In 2023, our tourism industry broke records. We had a record 43.7 million visitors to our state. That's over 14 times more people than who live here. These visitors spent a record $11.5 billion on things such as food and beverage, lodging, recreation, retail shopping, and transportation. We live in a state whose entire GDP is only about $120 billion, and we saw $11.5 billion in spending in the tourism industry alone, more than 6% more than was spent in 2022. So a 6% year-over-year growth. If we could get our GDP to grow at 6% in aggregate every year in our state, we'd be exceptionally happy about it. We're already there in tourism thanks to you, and we got to keep growing that. The total economic impact to our state was a record $17.5 billion. Over 133,000 jobs and $1.1 billion in state and local taxes were generated as a result of your industry. These record-breaking numbers speak volumes about the special things happening here, and it's further proof that Mississippi right now has significant momentum, and this is Mississippi's time. Now, my friends, suffice it to say, these numbers are a big deal, and they're another welcome addition to the long history of accomplishments that we have witnessed over the past several years. These record-shattering numbers would not have been possible were it not for you, because these are truly aggregated and happen in every community, large and small, all across Mississippi. What you have done, and I think you probably had fun doing it, but what you have done in the last year, and for many of you for many years, is you have strengthened our state. You have improved the lives of folks all across Mississippi. And for that, I know I am incredibly grateful, and I know the people that you work with and the people that you work for are incredibly grateful. I'm proud of the work that's being done. I'm proud of the partnership that we have developed with our friends in the legislature. And I want to particularly thank our senators and members of the House of Representatives that are here today. Appreciate your support of tourism, but more importantly, I appreciate your support of a growing economy, because we know that we're seeing that in our state. Last year, you heard me talk a little bit about the award-winning Wonder is Welcome campaign. I do believe that campaign was a huge success, and I'm excited to announce that this year campaign will focus on Mississippi being the birthplace of America's music. I was at an event recently, perhaps on a national stage, and I said something to the effect of, "Welcome to Mississippi, where our food is fried, our tea is sweet, and we are the birthplace of America's music." And that's exactly what we are. We're going to do a range of advertising across the country this year, including a Visit Mississippi float in the 2025 Rose Bowl Parade. And we're going to highlight Jackson State's Sonic Boom of the South's participation in that Rose Parade. Also in August, we unveiled a new marker in Atlantic City as part of the Mississippi Freedom Trail. It is the first Mississippi Freedom Trail marker that we have ever had in our outside the state of Mississippi. It is indeed a truly fantastic representation of history and what happened in the 1964 Democratic National Convention. It pays tribute to Fannie Lou Hamer, who fought for civil rights, including at that 1964 DNC convention in Atlantic City. I was proud to bring a piece of Mississippi's story to New Jersey, and I appreciated the hospitality that our friends in New Jersey showed us, and I look forward to working with y'all to continue expanding our footprint all across these United States of America.
That's the governor at the tourism conference last week in Hattiesburg. And after the break, John Horhn and his run for Jackson mayor on Mississippi Insight. Candidates are making their voices heard as we approach another mayoral election in Jackson. On Thursday, it was John Horhn's turn. Several supporters were on hand as the state senator unveiled his campaign at the Jackson Medical Mall.
Jackson is headed in the wrong direction, and we are fast running out of time to get it back on track. There are many who've already written off Jackson, who say it's too late for Jackson. That what's left is that we ought to just write our epitaph and throw some dirt over our face. No. We are under attack from within and from without. Amen. Some believe that the best thing to do is to haul off what you can and leave the rest to rot. Some just see an opportunity to terrorize the weak and vulnerable just because they can. Yes, yes. But to those who would want to count Jackson out, we say, not so fast. All right. Because Jackson is ready. We have it in our DNA to turn things around. It's in our blood. I'm reminded of the great leaders who have and are still paving the way, who refuse to take no for an answer, who dare to hope and wish and dream for a better day. But let us not forget the average, everyday folks who have that same DNA, but who feel that they're being let down, abandoned, laughed at, who find the means of making a way out of no way. who scrimp and save and try to make it through the day, to try to put enough food on the table, and houses that often need repair, who worry about being shot by random violence, who fear being run over by reckless drivers, who just want a clean drink of water, to be able to flush a toilet, and streets that don't tear up your car. We are ready to harness our talents in every corner of this city to turn it around and lift it up. Jackson is ready. And for that reason, I humbly announce my intention to run for mayor of the city of Jackson in next year's election.
We can expect a crowded field of contenders next year, all hoping to face off against incumbent Mayor Chokwe Antoine Lumumba, who is expected to run for re-election. Big thanks to Caleb Bedillion for joining us this week. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown from all of us here at 12 News. Make it a great weekend.